Nowadays, most of us depend on our smartphones for the very basics of existence. Waking up in the morning, getting from A to B, documenting our lives. Very few of us carry cameras around these days. For better or worse, we are never out of touch with friends or the world at large. But have you ever wondered what it takes to make one of these extraordinary devices? A smartphone is made from many different materials. About 40% is iron and aluminium, but there's also copper, cobalt, chromium and nickel in there too. There's plenty of plastic. About 6% is silicon. And there are minuscule amounts of more complex compounds like yttrium, neodymium, europium, gadolinium, and not to forget terbium. Of course, a smartphone isn't just its raw physical content. It was produced by assembling, probably somewhere in China or Korea, many different component parts according to a design produced in California. Underneath this gleaming screen sit rows of microchips pressed onto printed circuit boards. Somewhere in there there's a battery from which flows a small electric current that brings the whole thing to life. Try to imagine the extraordinary complexity that goes into producing any one of these component parts. Just take this sleek outer casing, which would have started out as oil, probably extracted in the Arabian Gulf, which would then have been distilled across some distant ocean before being moulded and transported to the assembly plant. There on an assembly line, it would have been fused together with all the other physical components. Once done, various bits of software would then have been imported into it, apps and other programs written by engineers in perhaps India or London. We might think of the companies that make smartphones as American or Korean or Chinese, but the reality is that the process that it takes to produce a single smartphone is well and truly global. This smartphone is so complex, there's no one person alive today smart enough to know how to make one from scratch. Not even the team at Apple or Samsung knew enough when they designed their first smartphone. They incorporated into their designs chips that others had engineered and screen technology that third parties had perfected. Another way of looking at it is that the effort and intelligence that it takes to make a smartphone are so great that the only way we are able to produce them is to draw off the insights, expertise and efforts of a wide network of people around the world, none of whom are likely to even know each other. But hold on, I hear you say. Doesn't the way that a smartphone is assembled by a big company with complex supply chains show a system of central planning at work? Well, of course, individual companies often centrally plan their own production processes. But even giant corporations with the most complex and lengthy supply chains straddling the globe are only overseeing what amounts to a tiny fraction of the overall process of production needed to produce a smartphone. The company that made your smartphone did so using hundreds, possibly thousands of component parts supplied to them by other firms. Those suppliers would in turn rely on their own network of suppliers, selling them a whole range of goods and services without which they couldn't do what they do. The people who mined the cobalt knew nothing of those who designed the software, who were oblivious of the company that created the chips. Yet together, that vast sum of know-how and effort produces something immensely sophisticated and affordable. And the whole process is all entirely voluntary. What is the name of this giant network of voluntary cooperation and exchange that sees so many different people in different countries and cultures working together in this way? It's called the free market. It takes the free market to produce a smartphone and give you access to low-cost communication, a whole world of information and apps for almost everything, all at the touch of a screen. And it's not just you who benefits either. There are now over 2.5 billion smartphones in operation around the world today, with lower cost ones coming onto the market all the time. Almost everyone can now access the type of technology that was once the preserve of rich people in rich countries. For the equivalent of just a few days' average pay in most countries, most people around the world can now have in their pockets more computing power than NASA had the day they landed a man on the moon. That's the power of the free market.